I took the job because my sister needed surgery and the insurance had lapsed 3 months prior. The production coordinator who hired me over the phone said the pay was triple union scale cash every Friday, and the only requirement was that I follow the site protocols exactly. She didn't call them rules, she said protocols, like we were handling biohazard materials instead of mopping sound stages. The battlefield was outside Shiloh, Tennessee, not the famous one, a smaller engagement from 1863 that most history books skip over. The production company had leased 60 acres of timber and cleared trenches for a limited series about field hospitals. The main set was a farmhouse they'd rebuilt from period photographs, plus 2 hospital tents, a commissary structure, and the production trailers clustered near the access road. I arrived on a Tuesday in late September. The leaves hadn't turned yet, but the air had that thin quality that comes before autumn fully commits. The site manager, a man named Carver who wore the same canvas jacket every day I knew him, met me at the cattle gate with a ring of keys and a laminated card. "Read this tonight," he said. "Read it again tomorrow before your shift. Keep it in your pocket." The card was site protocols, 16 items, single-spaced, printed small. "We lose people who don't read it," Carver said. "Lose? They quit. They walk off mid-shift and don't come back for their pay." He handed me the keys. "You'll work 11 at night to 7 in the morning. Cleaning crew is just you. Day janitor handles the trailers and honey wagons. You handle the sets and the perimeter structures." Perimeter structures? Old root cellar, monument maintenance shed, the tree-line privies. He pointed past the farmhouse toward a band of sycamores about 200 yards south. "There's a list of what gets cleaned when. Everything's on rotation. You'll have a radio, channel 9 only. I'm on 9 from 11:05 until 7. You call if you need something." "What about the cast and crew?" "Night shoots wrapped last week. You'll be alone on site except for the equipment security guy, and he stays in his truck by the main gate. You won't see him." Carver looked at the laminated card in my hand. "The protocols aren't suggestions. You follow them exactly or you're gone. No warnings, no second chances. We've had 6 janitors since July. You're number 7. He walked me through the farmhouse set first. 2 stories, historically accurate down to the horsehair plaster and the hand-forged nails. The ground floor was a surgical theater now, with prop tables and wax limbs and buckets of stage blood that had dried to brown crust. The second floor was officer quarters, 4 rooms with low ceilings and narrow windows that faced south and east. "You'll mop the surgical floor every night," Carver said. "Upstairs gets a sweep every 3 days unless there's been a shoot. The windows stay locked after midnight, all of them. Okay, physically check them. 11:30, you check every window latch on the second floor. There's 8. Count them. If one's open, you close it and you radio me immediately." "Even if someone just forgot?" "Especially then." He showed me the storage closet under the farmhouse stairs. Mops, brooms, industrial cleaner in yellow jugs, salt in a 50-pound bag with the top rolled and clipped. "You'll need the salt for the tent floors. Don't ask me why. Previous janitor said it keeps the smell down." The hospital tents were 60 feet long each, canvas over wood frames with cots arranged in 2 rows and more prop medical equipment piled on folding tables. They smelled like wet canvas and something older, like dirt that had been turned and never fully dried. I was supposed to sweep them every other night and check the tent stakes every night. Check them? Walk the perimeter. Make sure none are pulled up. If you find one loose, hammer it back in. There's a mallet in the storage closet. Mark any damaged stakes with chalk so day crew can replace them. The root cellar was behind the farmhouse, built into a low-rise that had probably been part of the original farm. The door was new wood painted to look old, with a padlock that took the largest key on the ring. "You'll inventory the cellar every night at 1:15 exactly," Carver said. "Not 1:10, not 1:20, 1:15. "Inventory what?" There's a list inside: cleaning supplies, backup props, some costumes. You'll count every item on the list and mark the sheet. If anything's missing, you radio me. What if I lose track of time? Set a watch. Set 2. He looked at me until I nodded. The monument shed is past the tree line. You don't go there unless the radio tells you to. Same with the privies. If I don't tell you to service them, you leave them alone. We walked back to the production trailers. Carver gave me a Motorola radio, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and a timesheet clipboard. He pointed to a parking spot near the cattle gate where I should leave my car. Last thing, he said, you'll see things on a night shift. Animals, usually. Deer come through around 3 or 4 in the morning. Sometimes raccoons in the commissary trash. If you see a person, you radio me. What if it's a cast member? There's no night shoots anymore. If you see a person on site between 11 and 7, you radio me and you stay inside the nearest building until I respond. You don't approach them. You don't ask questions. Even if they look lost, especially then. He told me to come back at 10:30 that night to start my first shift. I spent the afternoon in a motel room in Corinth reading the laminated card until I had it memorized. Site Protocols, Night Custodial 1. Arrive at 10:45. Unlock the farmhouse and turn on the ground floor interior lights only. Check that all second-floor windows are closed and latched by 11:30. 2. Perform radio check on Channel 9 at 11:05. Carver will confirm. If there is no response, leave the site immediately and call the emergency number on the back of this card. 3. Mop the surgical theater floor using the yellow cleaning solution. Do not use the blue solution after dark. Begin mopping no earlier than 11:15 and finish no later than 11:50. 4. At 1:15, inventory the root cellar. Use the checklist mounted inside the door. If any item is missing, radio Carver immediately and do not proceed with other tasks until he responds. 5. Sweep Hospital Tent 1 and Hospital Tent 2 on alternating nights. Check all tent stakes every night. Hammer in any loose stakes and mark damaged stakes with chalk. 6. Do not enter the monument shed or service the tree-lined privies unless instructed by radio. 7. Between 2:30 and 2:50, you may hear knocking on the farmhouse exterior doors. Do not open them. Do not look through the windows to see who is knocking. Continue working. 8. If you see a person on site who is not Carver, radio immediately and move to the interior of the nearest building. Do not speak to them. 9. The commissary structure is locked. You do not have a key. If you find the commissary door open, radio Carver and do not approach it. 10. At 4:45, patrol the perimeter road from the cattle gate to the tree line marker and back. This walk should take 12 minutes. If it takes longer or shorter, radio Carver. 11. If you see an animal moving backward or in a perfect circle, do not watch it. Return to the farmhouse and radio Carver. 12. The second-floor northwest room is officer storage. You may enter it to sweep, but you must leave the door open while you work. If the door closes on its own, exit immediately and do not return to the second floor for the rest of your shift. 13. At 6:30, turn off all interior lights and lock the farmhouse. Place your timesheet in the lockbox by the cattle gate. 14. If you hear someone call your name, do not answer. If you hear someone call your name 3 times, leave the site immediately. 15. Do not bring food onto the site. Do not smoke inside any structure. Do not play music or use headphones. 16. If your radio stops working, leave the site immediately. I read the list 6 times. Some of it made sense: protocols for security, for preserving the sets, for managing wildlife. Some of it didn't make sense at all. The knocking, the names, the animals moving wrong. I thought about my sister and the surgery estimate and the 3 paychecks that would cover it. I went back at 10:45. The site was dark except for a utility light on a pole near the equipment truck. I could see the security guard's silhouette in the cab, motionless. I unlocked the farmhouse door with the third key on the ring and flipped the light switches in the entryway. The surgical theater lit up in sections, two overhead fixtures that buzzed and flickered before settling. I checked the second floor first. 11:23 by my watch. The stairs creaked in a specific pattern, louder on the right side. The upstairs hallway was narrow and smelled like sawdust and something fainter, almost medicinal. I checked each window in sequence. Officer room 1, latched. Officer room 2, latched. Storage room latched. Officer room 3 latched. The northwest room latched. Officer room 4 latched. The small rear landing window latched. The east gable window latched. 8 total, all secure. At 11:05, I keyed the radio. "This is custodial, radio check." The radio crackled. "Carver confirmed. Start your shift." I filled the mop bucket in the farmhouse utility closet and mixed the yellow solution according to the ratio marked on the jug. The surgical theater was 12 feet by 20 feet, wood plank floors that had been painted and distressed to look authentically worn. The stage blood had pooled near the prop tables and dried in irregular shapes that looked too much like the real thing. I started mopping at 11:18. The solution cut through the residue cleanly but left a sharp chemical smell that made my eyes water. I worked in straight lines, corner to corner, wringing the mop every 4 passes. By 11:47, the floor was clean, and I dumped the bucket outside the back door into the gravel drainage area. The night was clear and cold. I could see the hospital tents from the farmhouse porch, their canvas pale gray in the starlight. Beyond them, the tree line was a black wall with no depth. I went back inside and waited. At 1:14, I put on my jacket and took the flashlight and walked to the root cellar. The padlock was cold enough to sting my fingers. Inside, the cellar was 8 feet by 10 feet, shelves on 3 walls, a bare bulb overhead. The checklist was laminated and mounted on a clipboard hanging from a nail. Root cellar inventory: night custodial yellow cleaner, jugs, 6 blue cleaner, jugs, 4 mop heads, spare, 3 brooms, 2 salt, 50-pound bags, 2 lanterns, kerosene, 3 costume trunk, locked, 1 prop crate, medical, 1 rope, coiled, 50-foot, 1 tarp, canvas. 2, I counted each item twice. Everything matched. I marked the sheet with the date and time and hung the clipboard back on its nail. When I turned to leave, the bulb flickered once, a quick dip to brown before it steadied. I locked the cellar door at 1:22. The hospital tents were next. Tonight was tent 1. I unzipped the entrance flap and stepped inside with the flashlight. The smell hit me immediately: wet earth and canvas and something underneath that reminded me of old wool left in a damp basement. The cots were arranged in 2 rows of 10, each one with a thin mattress and a folded gray blanket. The prop medical equipment, bone saws, amputation kits, ether masks sat on the tables between the rows. I swept the dirt floor slowly, working front to back. The bristles scraped against the packed earth. Twice I felt the floor give slightly under my weight, a soft spot that compressed and sprang back. At 1:50, I walked the tent perimeter, checking stakes, 42 total driven into the ground at 3-foot intervals. 41 were solid. The last one near the back southwest corner had lifted a ½ inch and leaned slightly inward. I hammered it back down with the mallet and marked it with chalk. The knocking started at 2:37. I was inside the farmhouse, sweeping the hallway near the surgical theater. 3 slow knocks on the front door, evenly spaced. I stopped sweeping and stood still. The protocol said, do not open them, do not look through the windows. I kept sweeping. The knocking moved to the back door. Same rhythm, 3 slow knocks. I counted to 10 and kept sweeping. The knocking moved to the east window, then the south window, circling the farmhouse at the same deliberate pace. 3 knocks at each point. It circled twice and stopped. At 2:53, the radio crackled. Custodial status check. I keyed the mic. Farmhouse swept. Tent 1 complete, all clear. Good. Finish your tasks. The rest of the shift was quiet. At 4:45, I started the perimeter patrol, walking from the cattle gate along the dirt access road to the tree line marker, a white stake with reflective tape and back. I counted my steps. 218 out, 220 back. 12 minutes total. At 6:30, I turned off the farmhouse lights and locked the door. I filled out my timesheet and dropped it in the lockbox. The security guard's truck was still parked by the gate, the cab dark now. I drove back to the motel as the sky turned gray. The second night, I arrived at 10:44. I unlocked the farmhouse and checked the windows by 11:29. All latched. Radio check at 11:05. Carver confirmed. I mopped the surgical theater floor from 11:19 to 11:48. The stage blood had been refreshed. There were new pools near the tables, still tacky to the touch. I used extra solution and mopped each section twice. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched the list except the rope. The coiled 50-foot rope was missing. I keyed the radio. Carver, root cellar inventory, rope is missing. The radio was silent for 8 seconds, then, confirmed. Do not proceed with tent duties. Return to the farmhouse and wait for further instruction. I locked the cellar and walked back to the farmhouse. I sat on the front steps with the radio in my lap. The night was overcast, no stars, the darkness dense enough that I couldn't see the hospital tents clearly. At 1:39, the radio crackled. Custodial, resume normal tasks. Mark the rope as missing on the log. I'll handle it tomorrow. Understood. I swept tent 2 that night. The same smell, the same soft spots in the floor. The tent stakes were all solid, no knocking at 2:30. The perimeter patrol took 12 minutes exactly. On the third night, I found the rope. It was coiled around the base of the tree line marker, 50 feet of hemp rope wound tight and staked at both ends. I radioed Carver at 4:51 during my patrol. Rope is at the tree line marker, coiled and staked. Do not touch it. Continue your patrol. Should I retrieve it? No. Leave it exactly where it is. I finished the patrol and locked up at 6:30. When I checked the root cellar the next day before my shift, the rope was back on its shelf. The knocking started again on the fourth night. 2:35, 3 slow knocks on the front door. I was mopping the surgical theater. I kept working. The knocking circled the farmhouse, 3 knocks at each window and door. It stopped at 2:49. At 3:07, I heard footsteps on the farmhouse porch. They were slow and uneven, like someone dragging one leg. The protocol said if you hear someone call your name, do not answer. It didn't say anything about footsteps. I stood in the surgical theater with the mop in my hands and listened. The footsteps crossed the porch from south to north, paused at the door, then crossed back and descended the steps. I radioed Carver at 3:12. Footsteps on the front porch, no knocking, no voice. Noted, continue your shift. Should I check outside? No. Stay inside until 4:45. The footsteps didn't return. At 4:45, I did my perimeter patrol. 219 steps out, 218 back. 12 minutes. On the 5th night, I met the other janitor. His name was Parnell. I found him sitting on the farmhouse steps at 10:53 when I arrived. He was maybe 60, thin, wearing a surplus army jacket and a canvas tool belt. "You're the new night guy," he said. "Started Monday. I'm day shift. Clean the trailers and the crew areas." He stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Carver tell you about the protocols?" "Yeah, I've got the card. You follow them?" "Every night." He nodded. "Good, last guy didn't. He's the reason the rope rule got added." He looked past me toward the tree line. He took the rope from the cellar to secure a tarp, tied it around the trees. Carver found it at dawn and fired him on the spot. Why does it matter? Don't know. Don't ask. That's the first thing you learn here. Don't ask why. He started walking toward the parking area. You hear the knocking yet? Every night. Footsteps? Once. You'll hear them more. Sometimes they sound like boots. Sometimes like bare feet. He stopped and turned back. One more thing. If you ever see someone standing at the tree line facing the farmhouse, don't look at them directly. Mark their position in your head and radio, Carver, but don't look at them straight on. What happens if I do? Don't know. Nobody who's looked has stayed long enough to tell me. He got in his truck and drove off. I checked the windows at 11:26, all latched. Radio check at 11:05, mopped the surgical theater until 11:44. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched. I checked the rope twice to make sure it was coiled properly. I was sweeping tent 1 at 1:55 when I saw the light. It was coming from the monument shed past the tree line. A faint yellow glow through the gaps in the shed's wood siding. The protocol said do not enter the monument shed unless instructed by radio. It didn't say anything about lights. I radioed Carver. There's a light in the monument shed. Static for 5 seconds. Are you certain? Yes, yellow light visible through the wall gaps. Turn off your flashlight and look again. I switched off the flashlight. The monument shed was dark. I turned the flashlight back on. The yellow glow returned, faint but steady. It's only visible when my flashlight is on, I said. Understood. Do not approach the shed. Complete your tasks and avoid looking in that direction. I finished sweeping the tent with my back to the tree line. The tent stakes were all solid. I didn't look south for the rest of the shift. The perimeter patrol at 4:45 was the worst. I had to walk past the tree line marker, and the monument shed was visible in my peripheral vision. I kept my eyes on the dirt road and counted my steps. 216 out, 223 back, 13 minutes. I radioed Carver at 4:59. Patrol took 13 minutes. Noted. Any reason for the delay? I slowed down near the tree line. Understood, don't do it again. The 12-minute timing is important. I didn't ask why. On the 6th night, Carver gave me an amended list. He was waiting at the farmhouse when I arrived at 10:44. He handed me a second laminated card, smaller than the first. Addendum protocols, he said. Read them now. They're effective immediately. Site protocols. Addendum 1. If your flashlight reveals something your eyes do not, turn off the flashlight and radio immediately. Do not investigate the discrepancy. 2. The surgical theater must be mopped in straight lines only. Do not mop in circular patterns. Do not retrace your steps while the floor is wet. 3. If you find the costume trunk in the root cellar unlocked, do not open it. Lock it with the padlock hanging inside the cellar door and radio immediately. 4. Do not count the cots in the hospital tents. The number is fixed and you do not need to verify it. 5. If you hear music from the direction of the commissary, do not attempt to locate the source. Continue your tasks. 6. During your perimeter patrol, if you see the security guard outside his truck, do not acknowledge him. Complete your patrol and radio Carver immediately upon return. 7. The salt in the root cellar is for tent floors only. Do not use it for any other purpose. Do not taste it. 8. If you complete your perimeter patrol in less than 11 minutes, walk it again immediately. Why the changes? I asked. We refine protocols based on night shift observations. Previous custodians reported incidents that required clarification. He pointed to item 4. That one's new as of this morning. Day crew found someone had written a count in the dirt inside tent 2. 19 cots. There are 20. What does that mean? It means don't count them. He took the card back and tapped item 6. This one's important. The security guard stays in his truck. If he's outside it, something's wrong and you need to tell me immediately. I nodded and put the addendum card in my pocket with the original protocols. That night, I checked the windows at 11:28. All latched. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater in straight lines from 11:17 to 11:49. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. The costume trunk was locked. The padlock inside the door, a small brass lock I hadn't noticed before, was hanging from a hook above the checklist. I checked the trunk lock twice. Solid. Everything else matched the list. I swept tent 2. I didn't count the cots, but I noticed them anyway. Muscle memory from the sweeping pattern. 20 cots, 10 per row. I checked the tent stakes at 2:18, all solid. The knocking started at 2:33. Front door, back door, east window, south window, 3 knocks each, evenly spaced. It circled twice and stopped. Footsteps crossed the porch at 2:56, slow, uneven, dragging. They stopped at the front door for 15 seconds, then descended the steps. At 3:40, I heard my name. I was in the farmhouse utility closet, refilling the mop bucket for a spot clean in the surgical theater. The voice came from outside near the back door. A man's voice, flat and without inflection. David. I froze. The protocol said, "Do not answer." I set down the jug of cleaning solution and waited. David. The same voice, the same tone. I counted to 30 and went back to filling the bucket. David. 3 times. The protocol said, "Leave the site immediately if you hear your name 3 times. I turned off the utility closet light, grabbed my keys and radio, and walked out the front door. The security truck was parked by the cattle gate, engine running, headlights on. I got in my car and drove to the motel without looking back. I called the emergency number at 4:15. A woman answered. Not Carver. "Night custodial, site evacuation," I said. "Heard my name 3 times. Confirmed. Do not return tonight. Carver will contact you tomorrow to verify protocols." She hung up. Carver called at 10 the next morning. "You followed procedure correctly. The site is clear. You can resume tonight." What was it? We don't know. Sometimes the site tests new people. You'll be fine. Has anyone ever not left? Yes, we found him in the surgical theater. He was unharmed, but he couldn't explain why he'd stayed. We let him go. Carver paused. "Tonight will be quiet. I'll be on the radio all shift." I went back that night at 10:43. The farmhouse lights were already on when I arrived. Yeskuni checked the windows at 11:27, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Carver confirmed. I mopped the surgical theater from 11:16 to 11:46. The floor was clean, no stage blood, no props, just bare wood. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched. The costume trunk was locked. I swept tent 1. The smell was fainter tonight, just canvas and earth. The tent stakes were solid, no knocking, no footsteps, no voices. The perimeter patrol took 12 minutes exactly. At 6:30, I locked the farmhouse and dropped my timesheet in the lockbox. The night had been so quiet I'd started to believe the protocols were just elaborate caution, the kind of rules that accumulate in any job where liability outweighs logic. I was wrong. On the 7th night, I saw the figure at the tree line. It was 4:49 during my perimeter patrol. I was walking back from the tree line marker toward the cattle gate when I noticed the shape. A person standing motionless about 20 yards into the trees facing the farmhouse. The angle and distance made details impossible, just a dark, vertical form against darker, vertical trunks. I remembered what Parnell said, "Don't look directly." I marked the position in my mind 20 yards in, slightly west of the marker, and kept walking. I didn't run. I didn't slow down. 211 steps back to the cattle gate. I radioed Carver at 4:58. Perimeter patrol complete, 12 minutes. Observed a figure at the tree line 20 yards in west of the marker. Did not approach or make direct eye contact. Confirmed. Do not return to that area tonight. Complete your remaining tasks inside the farmhouse only. Understood. I locked up at 6:30. When I looked toward the tree line from my car, the figure was gone. On the 8th night, the costume trunk was unlocked. I found it at 1:15 during my root cellar inventory. The lid wasn't open, but the padlock was hanging loose from the hasp. I checked the brass padlock on the hook inside the door, still there. Someone or something had opened the trunk with a different key. I radioed Carver. Root cellar, costume trunk unlocked. Lock is loose on the hasp. Do not open it. Use the brass padlock to secure it and exit the cellar immediately. I took the brass padlock from the hook. My hands were shaking enough that it took 3 tries to thread the shackle through the hasp. I snapped it shut and left the cellar. I was locking the exterior door when I heard the sound from inside, rustling, like fabric being moved. Then a single thump, muffled and heavy. I radioed Carver. Cellar is locked. I heard movement inside after securing the trunk. Understood. Do not re-enter the cellar for the rest of your shift. Inventory is suspended until tomorrow night. I went back to the farmhouse. At 2:31, the knocking started. 3 knocks, circling. At 3:03, I heard footsteps on the porch. At 3:17, heard fabric rustling outside the east window. The same sound I'd heard in the cellar. I kept working. I mopped a section of the surgical theater that didn't need mopping. I swept the hallway twice. At 4:45, I did the perimeter patrol without incident. 12 minutes. At 6:30, I locked up. The root cellar door was still padlocked. I didn't go near it. On the 9th night, Carver gave me a 3rd card. Emergency protocols, he said. These only apply during weather events or power failures. Read them now. Site protocols, emergency 1. If the farmhouse loses power, locate the backup lantern in the utility closet. Light it using the matches in the waterproof tin. Do not use your flashlight as a primary light source. 2. During thunderstorms, do not go outside. Suspend the perimeter patrol. Remain in the farmhouse until the storm passes or until 7 a.m., whichever comes first. 3. If you hear breaking glass, identify the source visually but do not approach it. Radio Carver with the location. 4. If the radio stops working during an emergency, light the signal flare stored in the utility closet and place it outside the front door. Then lock yourself in the northwest upstairs room until dawn. 5. If you see fire, evacuate immediately. Do not attempt to extinguish it. Call 911 from your vehicle. Weather report says storms tomorrow night, Carver said. If they hit during your shift, follow emergency protocols exactly. The tree line attracts lightning. You'll hear strikes. Don't let it rattle you. That night I arrived at 10:45. Checked windows at 11:29. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:18 to 11:49. At 1:15 I inventoried the root cellar. The costume trunk was locked with the brass padlock. Everything else matched the list. No sounds from inside. I swept tent 2. The stakes were solid. At 2:34 the knocking started. At 3:06 I heard footsteps and fabric rustling simultaneously. One on the porch and one at the south window. I kept sweeping the hallway. The perimeter patrol took 12 minutes. The figure at the tree line was back, same position 20 yards in. I didn't look directly. I finished my shift and locked up at 6:30. On the 10th night, the storm came. I arrived at 10:42 under a sky that looked like granite. The wind was already picking up, pushing leaves across the parking area in tight spirals. I checked the windows at 11:26, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Carver's voice sounded thinner through the static. Storm's moving in fast. Emergency protocols are active. No perimeter patrol tonight. Stay inside. Understood. I mopped the surgical theater from 11:17 to 11:48. The wind rattled the farmhouse walls. At 1:09, the power went out. The darkness was total. I stood in the surgical theater and counted to 10, letting my eyes adjust. Nothing. I felt my way to the utility closet and found the backup lantern, a kerosene lamp with a wire handle. The matches were in a waterproof tin on the top shelf. I lit the lantern on the second try. The light pushed back the darkness maybe 6 feet in every direction. Outside, the wind was screaming. I radioed Carver. Power out. Backup lantern lit. Static then. Confirmed. Do not attempt root cellar inventory. Remain in the farmhouse. At 1:37, the lightning started. The first strike was so bright it lit the surgical theater through the windows. The thunder followed instantly, a crack that shook the building. The second strike came 10 seconds later, then a third. The strikes were concentrating to the south, toward the tree line. At 1:55, I heard breaking glass. It came from upstairs. A single pane shattering, followed by the sound of glass hitting the floor. I radioed Carver. Breaking glass, second floor, unclear which room. Can you identify it visually? I took the lantern and climbed the stairs. The hallway was darker than the ground floor, the lantern light barely reaching the walls. I checked each room. Officer room 1, intact. Officer room 2, intact. Storage room, the east window was shattered. Glass covered the floor in a spray pattern that suggested the window had broken outward. East window, storage room, I radioed. Broke outward. No visible cause. Do not approach the window. Seal the room and return downstairs. I closed the storage room door and wedged a mop handle under it from the hallway side. Downstairs, the knocking started at 2:27, earlier than usual. 3 knocks at the front door. 3 knocks at the back door. 3 knocks at the east window. The knocking was louder tonight, harder, like fists instead of knuckles. At 2:48, I heard something else, scratching. It started at the south window, a slow, deliberate sound like fingernails on wood. It moved to the east window, then the north window, circling the farmhouse in time with the lightning strikes. I stood in the surgical theater with the lantern and waited. The scratching circled twice and stopped. At 3:23, I heard boots on the porch. Heavy, even steps. They crossed from south to north and stopped at the front door. Something tried the handle. The door rattled in its frame, but the lock held. The boots descended the steps and walked away. The lightning slowed at 4:15. By 4:30, the storm was moving east and the rain had reduced to a drizzle. The power came back at 4:51. The overhead lights flickered twice and steadied. I radioed Carver. Power restored. Storm passed. Farmhouse secure. Acknowledged. You can finish your shift. I turned off the lantern and put it back in the utility closet. At 6:30, I locked the farmhouse and dropped my timesheet in the lockbox. When I passed the root cellar, I noticed the padlock was open again, hanging loose from the hasp. I radioed Carver from my car. Root cellar padlock is open. I'll handle it. Good work tonight. I drove back to the motel through dawn light that looked too clean. On the 11th night, Carver met me at the cattle gate with a folder. Previous night custodian's logs, he said. The one before you. Read them before your shift. The folder contained 12 handwritten pages, dated entries from July through early August. The handwriting was neat, technical, emotionless. I sat in my car and read them under the dome light. July 18th, first night arrived 10:47. Window check complete by 11:28. All secure. Radio check 11:05. Mopped surgical theater 11:16 to 11:46. Root cellar inventory 1:15. All items present. Swept tent 1. 42 stakes checked. All solid. Knocking began 2:31. Circled farmhouse twice. Perimeter patrol 4:45. 4:57. 12 minutes. No incidents. Locked up 6:30, July 22nd, fourth night. Knocking at 2:29, footsteps on porch at 3:04, heard fabric rustling at south window, did not investigate. Root cellar inventory showed rope missing at 1:15, radioed Carver, waited at farmhouse per instruction. Rope found at tree line marker during patrol. Did not touch it. Rope returned to cellar by next shift. July 29th, 11th night, observed figure at tree line during patrol, 4:48. 25 yards in, directly south of marker, did not make eye contact, radioed Carver, completed patrol in 12 minutes, figure gone when I locked up. August 3rd, 16th night, root cellar inventory, 1:15, costume trunk unlocked. Used brass padlock per protocol. Heard movement inside after locking. Radioed Carver, suspended cellar entry, knocking louder tonight. Something tried the back door handle at 3:19, did not open. August 7th, 20th night, storm. Power out 1:22, lit backup lantern. Window broke upstairs, northwest room. Glass fell inward this time. Sealed room per protocol. Scratching on windows during storm. Boots on porch at 3:11, heavy rain until 5. Power restored 5:34. August 9th. 22nd night, root cellar inventory, 1:15. Counted items twice. Everything present but arrangement wrong. Costume trunk was against west wall, should be north wall. Rope coil was loose, should be tight. Radioed Carver. He said note the discrepancies, but do not rearrange items yourself. The next 3 entries were shorter, more terse. On August 12th, the previous custodian noted hearing music from the commissary at 3:47. A slow melody he couldn't identify. On August 14th, he saw the security guard standing outside his truck during the perimeter patrol, facing away from the road. He didn't acknowledge him, completed the patrol, and radioed Carver. On August 16th, the final entry read, August 16th, 29th night, arrived 10:44. Window check 11:27, all secure except northwest room. Window unlatched, closed it and radioed Carver per protocol. He said proceed normally. Radio check 11:05. Started mopping surgical theater 11:18. At 11:33 heard my name from upstairs. Male voice. Did not respond. Continued mopping. Heard my name again at 11:36, again at 11:39, 3 times total. Evacuated site per protocol 11:41. The folder contained no entries after August 16th. A handwritten note at the bottom of the last page read, Custodian terminated employment. Did not return for final pay. Site remained vacant until September 8th. I put the folder on the passenger seat and looked at Carver. What happened to him? Don't know. He called the emergency line and never came back. We mailed his check. Carver leaned against my car. You're doing better than he did. You follow protocols exactly. You don't improvise. That's what we need. Why are you showing me this? Because you should know the progression. Things start quiet, they escalate, they test you. If you stay consistent, if you follow the rules exactly every night, it plateaus. He tapped the folder. He panicked. He started cutting corners. He mopped in circles one night because it was faster. He counted the cots even though the addendum said not to. He stopped checking his watch and let the perimeter patrol run long. Small things. And that made it worse. The protocols exist because they work. Deviation invites escalation. Carver straightened up. You've been here 11 nights. You haven't deviated once. Keep doing that. I started my shift at 10:44. Windows checked by 11:28, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater in straight lines from 11:19 to 11:47. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. The costume trunk was locked. The items were arranged correctly, trunk against the north wall, rope coiled tight on its shelf. Everything matched the list. No sounds from inside. I swept tent 1. At 2:11, while I was checking the stakes, I noticed something in the dirt near the back corner. A depression, circular, about 3 feet across. The earth inside the depression was darker than the surrounding soil, almost black. I didn't have a protocol for this. I radioed Carver. Tent 1. Circular depression in the dirt near the back stake, southwest corner. 3 feet across. Soil is darker inside. How deep? I knelt and felt the edge. Half an inch, maybe less. Do not disturb it. Mark the location in your head. I'll have day crew check it. I finished checking the stakes and left the tent. At 2:36, the knocking started. Same pattern, circling twice. At 3:09, I heard footsteps on the porch and fabric rustling at the east window simultaneously. At 3:52, I heard music from the direction of the commissary, faint, slow, something with strings. I didn't attempt to locate the source. The perimeter patrol took 12 minutes. The figure at the tree line was visible again 20 yards in west of the marker. I didn't look directly. I locked up at 6:30. When I walked past Tent 1 on the way to my car, I could see the depression through the canvas gap where the entrance flap met the frame. It looked deeper now, maybe an inch. On the 12th night, Parnell was waiting at the farmhouse. It was 10:38. He was sitting on the steps again, smoking a cigarette. Carver said, "You found something in the tent." Depression in the dirt, southwest corner. I checked it this morning. 4 inches deep now, perfectly circular. The soil at the bottom is cold. He tapped ash off the cigarette. We filled it in, packed it tight, watered it down. By noon it was back, same depth, same diameter. What is it? Don't know. Carver's calling it a settling problem, ground subsidence. Parnell didn't sound convinced. He's adding it to the protocols. You're supposed to check it every night and report the depth. Don't touch it. Don't put anything in it. Just measure and report. What if it keeps getting deeper? Then we'll find out what's at the bottom. He stood up and ground out the cigarette. You're halfway through your first month. Most people don't make it this far. You thinking about staying? I need the money. That's what they all say. Then they hear their name, or they see something that doesn't make sense and the money stops mattering. He walked toward his truck. Carver likes you. He thinks you're steady. Don't prove him wrong. I checked the windows at 11:26, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:16 to 11:48. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched. The costume trunk was locked. I noticed the lanterns had been refilled. The kerosene levels were higher than last night. I swept tent 2. At 2:19, I checked the tent stakes and then walked to the southwest corner of tent 1. The depression was there, visible even in the flashlight beam. I knelt and measured it with my hand, 5 inches deep. The soil at the bottom was cold and slightly damp. I radioed Carver. Tent 1 depression, 5 inches deep. Soil is cold and damp. Acknowledged. Do not touch the soil. Continue your tasks. At 2:34, the knocking started. At 3:07, I heard footsteps on the porch, heavier tonight. They crossed to the front door and stopped. Something scraped against the door, a long, slow sound like metal on wood. Then the footsteps descended and walked away. At 3:41, I heard my name. I was in the utility closet checking the cleaning supply levels for the weekly log. The voice came from outside the back door. Male, flat, the same voice from the 6th night. David, I froze. The protocol said do not answer. If you hear your name 3 times, leave immediately. I set down my clipboard and waited. 15 seconds passed. 30. A minute. No second call. I went back to checking supplies. At 4:45, I did the perimeter patrol. The figure at the tree line was closer tonight, 15 yards in, visible in better detail. Dark clothing, tall, motionless. I kept my eyes on the road and counted steps. 213 out, 219 back, 12 minutes. I locked up at 6:30. The depression in tent 1 was visible through the entrance gap. It looked wider now, maybe 4 feet across. On the 13th night, Carver added another protocol. He was waiting at the cattle gate with a handwritten addendum on an index card. Site Protocols Addendum, continued 17. The depression in Tent 1 is a known subsidence issue. Measure and report its depth and diameter each night. Do not touch the soil. Do not place objects in the depression. If the depression reaches 12 inches deep, evacuate the site and radio immediately. 18. If you hear your name called only once or twice, you may continue working. 3 calls requires immediate evacuation per original protocol. 19. The figure at the tree line may move closer over time. Do not acknowledge it. Do not shine your flashlight directly at it. If it crosses the tree line marker, radio immediately and return to the farmhouse. The depression is subsidence? I asked. That's what we're calling it. Carver put the card in my hand. Measure it carefully tonight. Use the tape measure in the utility closet if you need precision. What happens if it reaches 12 inches? You leave. Day crew will handle it. He looked past me toward the farmhouse. We've had subsidence before. Usually it stops at 8 or 9 inches and stabilizes. Sometimes it fills back in on its own. This one's behaving differently. How? It's expanding. Yesterday it was 3 feet across. This morning it was 4. This afternoon it was 5. He met my eyes. If it reaches the tent wall, we're shutting down the site until we can excavate properly. But we need measurements until then. I started my shift at 10:43. Windows checked by 11:27, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:18 to 11:46. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched except the tarps. The list said 2 canvas tarps. There were 3. I radioed Carver. Root cellar inventory. 3 tarps present. List says 2. Confirmed. Count the tarps again. I counted them twice. 3 tarps, folded and stacked on the bottom shelf. 3 tarps confirmed, I radioed. Mark the discrepancy on the log. Do not remove the extra tarp. I'll verify tomorrow. I swept tent 2. At 2:23, I went to tent 1 with the tape measure. The depression was 6 inches deep and 5 feet across, almost perfectly circular. The soil at the bottom was cold and wet like clay that had been kept in a cellar. I radioed Carver with the measurements. Acknowledged. If it reaches 8 inches by your next check, radio immediately. At 2:31, the knocking started. At 3:04, I heard footsteps on the porch. They crossed to the front door, tried the handle, scraped against the wood, then descended. At 3:19, I heard fabric rustling at multiple windows simultaneously, east, south, and north all at once. At 4:45, I did the perimeter patrol. The figure at the tree line was 10 yards in now, close, enough that I could see it was wearing something dark and long, like a coat. Its posture was wrong. Shoulders too high, arms too still. I didn't look directly. 217 steps out, 216 back. 12 minutes. Before I locked up, I checked the depression again. 7 inches deep, 5.5 feet across. I radioed Carver. Depression is 7 inches deep, 5.5 feet across. Acknowledged. Good work tonight. I drove back to the motel under a sky that was starting to lighten. On the 14th night, the depression was 8 inches deep. I measured it at 2:26 after sweeping tent 2. 8 inches deep, 6 feet across. The soil at the bottom was wet and smelled like iron. I radioed Carver. Depression is 8 inches deep, 6 feet across. Soil smells metallic. Do not approach it again tonight. Mark the measurement and continue your tasks. At 2:33, the knocking started. At 3:06, I heard footsteps and scratching simultaneously. At 3:38, I heard my name twice, 15 seconds apart. Same voice, same flat tone. I didn't respond. The perimeter patrol was at 4:45. The figure at the tree line was 5 yards in now, close enough that I could see it had no face. Where the face should be was darkness, smooth and featureless. I kept walking. 219 steps out, 214 back. 12 minutes. At 6:15, before locking up, I checked the depression one last time. 9 inches deep, 6.5 feet across. I radioed Carver. Depression is 9 inches deep, 6.5 feet across. Static then. Acknowledged. Tomorrow night we may implement emergency protocols depending on progression. Be prepared for site evacuation. On the 15th night, I arrived to find Carver and Parnell both waiting at the farmhouse. Carver was holding a clipboard and a digital camera. Parnell had a shovel and a roll of yellow caution tape. "We're documenting the depression before your shift," Carver said. "After you check the windows, meet us at tent 1. I checked the windows at 11:25, all latched except the northwest room. The window was open 2 inches, the latch disengaged. I closed it and radioed Carver. Northwest room window was open. How far? 2 inches, latch was disengaged, not broken. Secure it and proceed. I met them at tent 1 at 11:37. The depression was 10 inches deep and 7 feet across. Parnell was photographing it from multiple angles while Carver took measurements with a laser device. "Soil temperature is 41 degrees, Carver said. "Air temperature is 63. The depression is 22 degrees colder than ambient." He looked at me. "Did you touch the soil last night?" "No. I measured depth with the tape measure but didn't make contact." "Good." He marked something on his clipboard. "We're cordoning this off. You'll still measure it tonight, but you'll do it from outside, the tape line. Don't cross the tape for any reason." Parnell finished photographing and started unrolling the caution tape in a circle around the depression, about 3 feet out from the edge. He tied it to 4 tent stakes. "If the depression reaches the tape line, evacuate immediately," Carver said. "Don't wait to radio, just leave and call the emergency number from your car." They left at 11:53. I mopped the surgical theater from 11:55 to 12:26, 15 minutes behind schedule. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. The extra tarp was gone. Everything matched the list now. I swept tent 2. At 2:30, I measured the depression from outside the tape line, 10 inches deep, 7.5 feet across. The expansion was accelerating. I radioed Carver. "Depression is 10 inches deep, 7.5 feet across." Acknowledged. "Monitor it again at 4:30 before your patrol." At 2:34, the knocking started. At 3:08, I heard footsteps, scratching and fabric rustling simultaneously. At 3:21, I heard my name once. At 3:54, I heard music from the commissary, louder than before, a slow melody with strings and something that sounded like a voice underneath. At 4:30, I checked the depression. 11 inches deep, 8 feet across. The tape line was 2 feet away. I radioed Carver. "Depression is 11 inches deep, 8 feet across, 2 feet from tape line." "Understood. Complete your perimeter patrol. If the depression reaches 12 inches, we're evacuating and closing the site tomorrow." The perimeter patrol was the worst yet. The figure at the tree line was at the marker now, standing directly beside it. 8 feet tall, dark coat that reached the ground, no face. I could hear it breathing slow, wet, deliberate. I kept walking and counting. 221 steps out, 212 back. 12 minutes. I locked up at 6:30. Before I left, I walked to tent 1 and looked at the depression from outside the entrance. 11.5 inches deep. The tape line was 18 inches away. On the 16th night, Carver was waiting with a new protocol card and a handheld radio. "Emergency backup," he said, giving me the second radio. "Keep it on channel 9. If your primary fails, use this one. If both fail, light the signal flare and lock yourself in the northwest room." The new protocol card had one item: Site Protocols Emergency. Continued. 6. If the depression in tent 1 reaches or exceeds 12 inches in depth, evacuate the site immediately. Do not complete remaining tasks. Radio from your vehicle and do not return until cleared by Carver. We're shutting down tomorrow for excavation, Carver said. Tonight's your last shift until we figure out what's causing the subsidence. If it hits 12 inches, you leave. If it doesn't, you finish your shift normally and we'll start excavation Monday. I checked the windows at 11:27. All latched. Radio check at 11:05 on both radios. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:17 to 11:49. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched. The costume trunk was locked. The brass padlock was on its hook. I swept tent 2. At 2:32, I measured the depression. 11.5 inches deep, 8.5 feet across, 6 inches from the tape line. I radioed Carver. Depression is 11.5 inches deep, 8.5 feet across, 6 inches from tape line. Acknowledged. Check it again at 4. At 2:33, the knocking started. At 3:05, I heard footsteps on the porch, the scraping on the door, the footsteps descending. At 3:16, I heard scratching on all windows simultaneously. At 3:43, I heard my name twice, 10 seconds apart. At 4:02, I heard something else, a sound from tent 1. Low, rhythmic, like breathing but deeper. I radioed Carver. Unusual sound from tent 1, rhythmic, low frequency, similar to breathing. Can you describe it more precisely? I walked to the tent entrance and listened. The sound was coming from the depression. A wet, slow inhalation and exhalation, perfectly timed. 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out. It's coming from the depression, I radioed. 6-second intervals in and out. Do not enter the tent. Return to the farmhouse immediately. I walked back to the farmhouse. The sound was audible from 30 yards away. A deep rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate the ground. At 4:30, I approached the tent entrance with the tape measure. The sound had stopped. I measured the depression from outside the tape line. 12 inches deep, 9 feet across. The tape line was 3 inches away. I radioed Carver. Depression is 12 inches deep, 9 feet across. 3 inches from tape line. Breathing sound has stopped. Evacuate now. Leave everything except the radios and your keys. Go directly to your vehicle and call the emergency number. I set down the tape measure and walked to my car. The site was silent. No knocking, no footsteps, no scratching. Even the wind had stopped. I called the emergency number from my car at 4:39. The same woman answered. Night custodial site evacuation. Depression reached 12 inches. Confirmed. Site is closed for excavation. Carver will contact you Monday with next steps. You'll be paid for tonight and for the closure period. I drove back to the motel. At 5:17, when the sun was just starting to turn the sky gray, my phone rang. Carver. The depression collapsed at 4:53, he said. Day security reported it over the radio. The entire tent structure subsided into a sinkhole approximately 15 feet deep. We're bringing in ground-penetrating radar and an excavation team Monday. What do you think it is? Don't know yet. Could be an old well. Could be a trench from the original battle. Could be something else. He paused. You did good work. You followed every protocol exactly. When we reopen, I want you back on night shift. What if you find something down there? Then we'll write new protocols. He hung up. I slept until noon and spent the afternoon reading through my own logs from the past 16 nights. The progression was clear when laid out chronologically: knocking, footsteps, scratching, voices, the depression expanding, the figure at the tree line moving closer. Everything escalating in parallel, coordinated, deliberate. On Monday, Carver called at 9 in the morning. Excavation team found something. Can you come to the site at noon? I drove out to find 2 white work trucks, a small excavator, and 6 people in hard hats standing around tent 1. The tent had collapsed completely, the canvas shredded and folded into the sinkhole. The depression was now a crater 20 feet across and 18 feet deep. Carver was standing at the edge with Parnell and a woman in a work vest who he introduced as Dr. Hayward, an archaeologist from the State Historical Society. "We found a burial pit," Dr. Hayward said. She showed me photographs on a tablet. The bottom of the crater was filled with bones. Human bones, dozens of them arranged in layers. Civil War era. Probably a mass grave from the field hospital. The farmhouse would have been the surgical site. Bodies were likely buried in the hospital tent area for expedience. How many bodies? At least 40, maybe more. We'll know when we complete the excavation. She swiped to another photo showing a closer view. The bones were stained dark, almost black, and arranged in neat rows. The interesting thing is the burial pattern. They were interred in a very specific formation. Circular, radiating out from a central point. Not typical for a mass grave. "What does that mean?" I asked. "We don't know yet. It could be ceremonial. It could be practical. Digging a circular pit is actually more efficient than a rectangular one if you're working quickly." She put the tablet away. "Either way, this explains the subsidence. The soil over the burial pit was compacted improperly or never compacted at all. Over time, with foot traffic and weather, it began to collapse." Carver walked me back toward the farmhouse. "We're shutting down the site for 6 weeks while they excavate and properly rebury the remains. Production's moving to a soundstage in Nashville. When we reopen, the burial area will be cordoned permanently and marked with a monument." "What about the protocols?" "Most of them stay the same. Some will be revised based on the new site configuration." He stopped at the farmhouse steps. "The excavation explains the subsidence. It doesn't explain everything else you reported. The knocking, the footsteps, the voices, the figure at the tree line. You think they're related?" "I think the site has history, the battlefield, the burial pit, the production recreating a field hospital. It's a lot of resonance." He looked back at the crater. "Dr. Hayward said something interesting. She said circular burial formations were sometimes used for mass graves where the cause of death was disease or trauma that made the bodies difficult to handle. The circular pattern allowed grave diggers to work from the outside in without stepping on remains. So it was practical. Maybe, or maybe it was containment." He handed me an envelope. 2 weeks' pay plus closure compensation. I'll call you when we're ready to reopen. Your first choice for night custodial if you want it." I took the envelope. "What happened to the figure at the tree line?" "What do you mean?" "It was moving closer every night. By my last shift, it was at the marker. Did day crew see anything?" Carver shook his head. "Parnell checked the tree line every morning, never saw anything." "It was there. I believe you, but whatever it was, it only showed itself at night. To you." He started walking to his truck. "That's why the protocols work. They're not about preventing contact. They're about managing it, containing it, making sure it stays where it belongs." I spent the next 6 weeks working a warehouse job in Corinth. The pay was a third of what Carver paid, but the shifts were daytime and the protocols involved nothing more complicated than checking pallet counts and forklift maintenance. Carver called on November 2nd. "We're reopening Monday, November 6th. Night, custodial, same terms, same pay. You interested?" "What changed?" "Burial pit is excavated and filled. The remains are being reinterred at the National Cemetery. The tent area is now a memorial garden with a plaque. We've rebuilt tent 150 feet north of the original location. Tent 2 is unchanged. Everything else is the same." "New protocols?" "Minor revisions. I'll give you the updated cards Monday." He paused. "Dr. Hayward found something at the bottom of the pit. She didn't put it in her official report, but she told me about it. There was a stone at the center of the burial formation. Flat, circular, about 3 feet across. It had markings on it." "What kind of markings?" "Words. Carved shallow, hard to read." She managed to photograph them before the stone was removed. She thinks they're names. He paused again. 43 names, one for each body in the pit. What happened to the stone? It's in storage at the Historical Society. Dr. Hayward said it shouldn't be reinterred with the remains. Too much cultural significance. I agreed to start Monday. I arrived at 10:43 on November 6th. The site looked different in subtle ways. The memorial garden was marked with a low fence and a granite plaque. The new tent one was positioned further from the farmhouse, closer to the commissary. The tree line looked the same. Carver met me at the cattle gate with 3 laminated cards, the original protocols, the addendum list, and a new card labeled Site Protocols Post-Excavation. Site Protocols Post-Excavation 1. The memorial garden is off-limits to night custodial. Do not enter the fenced area for any reason. If you observe anything unusual in the memorial garden, radio Carver immediately. 2. The new tent 1 location requires a modified stake check. 45 stakes total, arranged in 15 sets of 3. Check each set in sequence. 3. If you hear breathing sounds from the memorial garden area, do not investigate. Radio Carver and remain in the farmhouse until instructed otherwise. 4. The stone circle has been removed. If you observe a circular depression anywhere on site, evacuate immediately and radio from your vehicle. 5. All other protocols remain in effect as previously documented. I checked the windows at 11:26, all latched, radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:18 to 11:48. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar. Everything matched the list. The costume trunk was locked. I swept the new tent 1. 45 stakes, 15 sets of 3, all solid. The tent smelled cleaner than the old one, just canvas and dust, no wet earth underneath. At 2:34, the knocking started. Same pattern as before, circling the farmhouse twice. At 3:07, I heard footsteps on the porch. They crossed, tried the handle, scraped the door, descended. At 3:56, I heard something new. A woman's voice calling from the direction of the memorial garden. Not my name. Someone else's name. Thomas, Thomas. 2 calls, then silence. I radioed Carver. Female voice from memorial garden area, called a name twice, not mine. Acknowledged. Do not approach the garden, continue your tasks. At 4:45, I did the perimeter patrol. The figure at the tree line was gone. I walked the route without incident. 218 steps out, 217 back. 12 minutes. I locked up at 6:30. The site felt different, still uneasy, still watchful, but less concentrated. As if something that had been compressed was now distributed across a wider area. On my second night back, I heard 3 names from the memorial garden. Thomas, William, Joseph. Male voice calling each name twice. On my 3rd night, I heard 5 names. On my 4th night, I heard 8. By the end of the week, I'd heard 23 different names, all called from the memorial garden area between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. I reported each one to Carver. He logged them without comment. On my 10th night back, Carver met me at the farmhouse before my shift. Dr. Hayward sent me the list of names from the stone, he said. He showed me a printed page with 43 names arranged in 2 columns. Do any of these match the names you've heard? I scanned the list. Thomas Williams, William Cassidy, Joseph Brennan. Every name I'd heard was on the list. All of them, I said. How many have you heard so far? I checked my logs. 23 different names. The stone had 43. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket. If the pattern continues, you'll hear all 43 by the end of the month. What happens then? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe it stops. He looked toward the memorial garden. Or maybe it starts over. He was right. By November 30th, I'd heard all 43 names, each one called twice from the Memorial Garden between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning. On December 1st, the names started over. Thomas, William, Joseph, cycling through in the same order. The knocking continued. The footsteps continued. The scratching continued. I followed every protocol exactly. I mopped in straight lines, inventoried at 1:15, checked stakes, completed perimeter patrols in 12 minutes. On December 15th, Carver told me the production company was extending the lease through March. They want to do additional filming in January. Interior scenes, night shoots in the farmhouse. You'll have 2 weeks off while they shoot. Full pay. I took the 2 weeks off in mid-January. When I came back on February 1st, the site felt different again, heavier. The knocking was louder, the footsteps more frequent. I started hearing fabric rustling even when there was no wind. On February 8th, I saw the figure at the tree line again. It was 4:48 during my perimeter patrol. 20 yards in, west of the marker, same as before. Dark coat, too tall, no face. It was back. I didn't look directly. I completed the patrol in 12 minutes and radioed Carver. Figure at tree line, 20 yards in, west of marker. Acknowledged. Same position as before the closure. Yes. Noted. Continue your shift. The figure moved closer over the next 2 weeks. 15 yards, 10 yards, 5 yards. On February 22nd, it was at the marker again. On February 27th, Carver called me at noon. Dr. Hayward wants to return the stone. What? The stone from the burial pit. She says the Historical Society doesn't want it. Too much liability, too many questions about provenance and cultural context. She's asking if we want it back on site. Do you? I'm asking you. You're the one who works nights. You're the one who hears the names. He paused. She thinks the stone was a marker, not just a memorial. Something placed there intentionally to contain or direct whatever was buried beneath it. You think bringing it back will stop the escalation? I think leaving it in storage hasn't helped. He sighed. It's your call. You're the one who has to work here. I thought about the 43 names, the footsteps, the figure at the tree line, the knocking that circled and circled. I thought about the protocols, the careful procedures designed to manage something that couldn't be explained. Bring it back, I said. The stone was reinstalled on March 1st, placed at the center of the memorial garden under 4 inches of soil and covered with grass sod. Dr. Hayward supervised the reinstallation personally. I watched from the farmhouse steps as they lowered it into position. A flat circular stone 3 feet across with carved names barely visible on its surface. That night I arrived at 10:44. Windows checked by 11:27. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:17 to 11:49. At 2:33 the knocking started, but it was quieter, softer, like knuckles instead of fists. At 3:06 I heard footsteps on the porch, but they didn't try the handle. They just crossed and descended. At 3:48 I heard a single name from the memorial garden. Thomas. Just once, not twice. Then silence. At 4:45 I did the perimeter patrol. The figure at the tree line was gone. I locked up at 6:30. The site felt lighter, less compressed, as if something that had been searching had found what it needed. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. Quieter knocking, gentler footsteps, single names instead of repeated calls. On March 15th, the knocking stopped entirely. The footsteps stopped, the names stopped. I still heard things, fabric rustling, distant music, occasional sounds that might have been wind or might have been something else. But the aggressive escalation was gone. The site had settled into a kind of equilibrium. Carver met me at the farmhouse on March 20th. Production's wrapping in 2 weeks. They'll be clearing out by April 5th. After that, the property reverts to the Historical Society. They're planning to turn it into a memorial site and museum. What happens to night custodial? The museum won't need it. They'll have standard security, daytime hours only. He handed me an envelope. 2 weeks' notice, full severance, and a bonus. You lasted longer than anyone else we've hired, 7 months without missing a shift. What about the protocols? I'm writing them up formally. The Historical Society wants documentation of everything we observed, everything we implemented. They're calling it a site management plan. He smiled slightly. You're going to be part of the official record. Will they keep following them? I don't know. They'll have the documentation. Whether they use it or not isn't up to me. He looked toward the memorial garden. The stone made a difference. Whatever was here, whatever was trying to get out or get in or just be acknowledged, it's settled now. Dr. Hayward thinks the stone acts as a kind of anchor. As long as it stays in place, the site stays stable. What if someone moves it? Then whoever's here at night will have to deal with the consequences. He held out his hand. Thank you for the work. You kept this place functional when it could have gone very wrong. I shook his hand. What about you? What's next? Different site, different production, different protocols. He walked toward his truck. It's always the same work, really. You find out what the rules are, you follow them exactly, and you hope that's enough. My last shift was April 3rd. I arrived at 10:42 under a clear sky with a half moon. I checked the windows at 11:28, all latched. Radio check at 11:05. Mopped the surgical theater from 11:19 to 11:47. At 1:15, I inventoried the root cellar for the last time. Everything matched the list. The costume trunk was locked. The brass padlock hung on its hook. I swept Tent 1 and Tent 2. The stakes were solid. The memorial garden was quiet behind its low fence, the grass green and unmarked. At 2:30, I heard nothing. At 3, I heard nothing. At 4, I heard nothing. At 4:45, I did the perimeter patrol. 217 steps out, 218 back, 12 minutes. The tree line was dark and empty, no figure, no movement, just trees. At 6:30, I turned off the farmhouse lights and locked the door. I filled out my timesheet, my last one, and dropped it in the lockbox. The security guard's truck was parked by the gate, the cab dark. I sat in my car for a few minutes looking at the site, the farmhouse, the hospital tents, the memorial garden, the tree line beyond. In daylight, it would look ordinary, a historical site, a reconstructed farm, a place where something terrible had happened once and had been memorialized properly. But I knew what it was at night. I knew what moved in the darkness, what tested the boundaries, what called the names of the dead. I knew the protocols that kept it contained, the careful procedures that maintained the fragile balance between acknowledgement and invitation. I started the car and drove to the cattle gate. Parnell was there, arriving early for the day shift. He parked and walked over to my window. "Last night?" he said. "Last night. How was it?" "Quiet. Everything settled." I handed him my keyring. "The protocols are in the farmhouse office, top drawer of the filing cabinet. Original list, both addendums, emergency procedures, and post-excavation revisions. Everything's labeled and dated. You think the museum people will follow them? I don't know. Carver's giving them the documentation. After that, it's not our problem." Parnell looked toward the farmhouse. "I've been day shift here for 9 months. Seen a lot of weird things, but never the things you reported. The knocking, the footsteps, the figure. It's like the site saves it all for night." "Maybe it does." I put the car in drive. "You ever think about switching to nights?" "Not once." He stepped back from the car. "Good luck out there." I drove away as the sun came up over the tree line. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Dr. Hayward. She'd heard I'd left the site and wanted to thank me for cooperating with the excavation and reinstallation. We talked for a few minutes about the burial pit, the stone, the names. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "I did more research on the stone after we reinstalled it. The markings aren't just names. There's text around the outer edge, carved even shallower than the names. I had to use specialized imaging to read it." "What did it say?" "It's a set of instructions. Rules, really. Things like, do not disturb the earth after dark and mark the boundaries at sunset and speak the names when called." She paused. "It's a protocol list. Someone in the 1860s wrote down protocols for managing the burial site. Did anyone follow them? I don't know. The stone was buried face down, which suggests someone wanted to hide it or make it inactive. When your production company cleared the site, they disturbed the earth. When you started working nights, you were there when the site was most active. When we removed the stone for analysis, we took away the anchor. And when you put it back, we put it back face up, with the protocols visible. Even though they're buried now, they're oriented correctly. The stone is functioning as designed." She paused. "The protocols your company wrote, the ones you followed every night, they're remarkably similar to what's carved on the stone. Same categories, same logic, same approach. You were following rules that were written 160 years ago without knowing it. How is that possible? I think the site teaches people what it needs. The knocking, the footsteps, the voices, the escalation, it's all communication. The site was telling you what the rules were, and you figured out how to respond. Correctly?" She paused. "The people who buried the stone understood that. They wrote the protocols down so others could learn faster. But the stone got buried and forgotten, and every generation since has had to figure it out again from scratch. What happens if the museum doesn't follow them? Then the site will start teaching again. The knocking will come back, the footsteps, the voices. It will escalate until someone figures out the protocols or until the site is abandoned again." She sighed. "I've submitted a recommendation to the Historical Society. I told them the protocols should be posted publicly, included in the site management plan, treated as historical documents in their own right. We'll see if they listen. Will they? I don't know. People don't like being told there are rules they don't understand. They'll want to rationalize everything, find natural explanations, dismiss the supernatural elements." She paused. "But you believed. You followed the protocols exactly, even when they didn't make sense. That's why you survived 7 months when others quit after a few weeks." We talked for a few more minutes and then hung up. I sat in my apartment and thought about the stone, the names, the protocols carved into rock by someone who understood what the site required. I thought about the figure at the tree line, the knocking that circled, the voices that called the names of the dead. I thought about the careful procedures that kept everything contained, not prevented, not stopped, but managed, acknowledged, given structure. I never went back to the site. I heard from Carver once, about 6 months later. The museum had opened in May. They'd hired a standard security company, daytime guards only. By June, they'd started having problems, equipment malfunctions, unexplained sounds on the security recordings, volunteers who quit after 1 or 2 shifts. In July, they hired a night custodian. The first one quit after 3 nights. The second lasted a week. The third was still there as of Carver's call, following a protocol list that the museum director had found in the filing cabinet. "It's the same list you followed," Carver said. "They didn't write new ones, they just started using yours." "Are they working?" "So far. The custodian's been there 5 weeks. She reports the same things you did, knocking, footsteps, voices, calling names. But as long as she follows the protocols exactly, nothing escalates. The site stays stable." "Did they post the protocols publicly like Dr. Hayward recommended?" "No. The director said it would scare visitors. So the protocols are internal only, given to the night custodian on a laminated card." He laughed quietly. "Same as we did." "What about the stone?" still buried in the memorial garden. Face up, protocols visible, grass growing over it. Dr. Hayward checks on it every few months. She says as long as the stone stays in place and someone follows the protocols at night, the site will remain stable, indefinitely. And if someone stops following them, then we start over. The site escalates, someone figures out the protocols again, and the cycle continues. He paused. It's not a perfect system, but it works. That's all you can ask for with places like this. We said goodbye, and I never heard from him again. I think about the site sometimes, especially at night. I think about the 43 names carved in stone, the protocols written by someone who understood what the dead required. I think about the careful procedures that create a boundary between worlds, not a wall, not a barrier, but a set of rules that both sides can follow. I think about the next person who'll work night custodial, and the person after that, and the person after that. Each one learning the protocols, following them exactly, maintaining the fragile balance that keeps the site stable. I think about the figure at the tree line, waiting in the darkness. I think about the footsteps that circle but never enter. I think about the voices that call the names of the dead, over and over, making sure they're not forgotten. And I think about the protocols themselves, simple, testable, operational rules that make no sense until you understand what they're really doing. They're not keeping something out. They're keeping something known, acknowledged, structured. They're making sure the dead have a voice, as long as someone's there to hear it. I wrote my own protocols before I left the site. A clean list, formatted clearly, with notes in the margins based on my 7 months of observation. I left it in the filing cabinet with Carver's original list and all the addendums. I don't know if anyone's read it. I don't know if anyone will. But I know the protocols will survive. They always do. Because places like the battlefield site teach you what they need, one shift at a time, one protocol at a time, until someone writes it down correctly. And then the next person reads it, follows it, and keeps the site stable for as long as they're willing to work nights. That's the job. That's always been the job. You follow the protocols exactly. You don't ask why. You don't deviate. You don't improvise. And you pass the protocols on to the next person, clean and clear and complete, because somewhere someone will need them. Someone will arrive for their first night shift, check the windows at 11:28, do a radio check at 11:05, and mop the floor in straight lines until 11:50. They'll hear the knocking at 2:30. They'll hear the footsteps at 3. They'll hear the names called from the memorial garden between 3:30 and 4:30. And they'll radio Carver, or whoever answers now, and they'll say, "Unusual sounds from the memorial garden area. Should I investigate?" And the voice on the radio will say, "No. Continue your tasks. You're doing fine." And they'll finish the shift. They'll lock up at 6:30, they'll drop their timesheet in the lockbox, and they'll come back the next night, and the night after that, following the protocols exactly. Because that's how you survive a place like this. You learn the rules, you follow them without question, and you trust that someone before you figured out the right way to acknowledge what the site requires. The protocols work. They always have. They always will. You just have to be willing to follow them exactly night after night until your shift is done and you pass them on to whoever comes next. That's the job. That's the only job that matters.